Hey there, this is Sid and today we shall solve a SQL problem from StrataScratch. The title of the problem is Viewers Turned Streamers. It's listed as a hard problem and the ID of the problem is 2012. As always, we shall start off by having a look at the input table. We shall then come back to this page and try to understand the problem. For simplicity, I have exported the input table to Microsoft Excel. This is our input table. It consists of 5 columns: user ID, start session, end session, session ID and session type. This is presumably taken from some streaming platform. The input table is fairly simple. It lists the start and end time for each session from each user, and it also mentions whether the session type was a streaming or a viewing session. Now let's go back to the problem. It says that find out all the users whose first session was a viewer, and then once you have isolated those users, find out how many streaming sessions they had. That's the problem statement. Now we have solved this problem in Microsoft Excel first. Let us try to understand the solution in Excel. Once we understand, we shall try to put it back in SQL. So here I have created an intermediate table. This intermediate table is almost exactly the same as the input table, except that it has one additional column and the order of the rows are slightly different. So let's first talk about the ordering of the rows. What I have done is I have ordered all the rows by the user ID, and within each user ID I have ordered the rows by their session ID. So the lowest session ID, which is the oldest session, appears at the top, the second oldest at the next position, the third oldest at the next position, and so on and so forth. The same thing has been done for the other user IDs as well. So once this table is properly ordered, an additional column eligible has been added, and it has two possible values, yes or no. For ease of understanding, I have color coded each of the users with a distinct color. So now to decide the value of this column eligible, look at the first record for each user. Is it a viewer or a streamer? If it is a streamer, then this user will not contribute to our final solution, because our final solution says that pick out the users who began as viewers and then transform to streamer. User 1 is eligible because user 1 started off as a viewer. User 3 is also eligible because 3 also started off as a viewer. User 2 again is not eligible because the first session of user 2 is a streaming session. So from this intermediate table, we are going to take user 1 and user 3 onto the next step. So the final solution of the problem expects us to count the number of streaming sessions for each of the eligible users. By merely looking at the intermediate table, we can readily see what the final output should be. For user ID 1, the number of streaming sessions post the initial viewing session is 1, and similarly for user ID 3, the number of streaming sessions post the first viewing session is 1. So this is our final output table. Now that we understand the problem in Excel, let us go back to SQL. As always, I have written the SQL code in Notepad++ because it's much easier to follow it there. I have created a CTE called sessions time ranked. This CTE assigns a row number, which is a window function, by partitioning the table by user ID and within each partition ordering it by the session start time. This basically does the ordering work that I have color coded in this Excel block of rows. So I have collected all the rows that belong to the same user together, and then within that chunk or block of rows I have ordered the rows by the session ID, and I have assigned a number called row number starting from the lowest session ID onto the highest session ID, and I have done the same thing for the other users as well. So you can see that the row number will be assigned in a fashion that I have just typed in the column N of this table. So once the row number is assigned, I create a new CTE called first session viewer. This CTE is nothing but a subset of the first CTE where we have filtered out only those users for whom the first row was a viewer. This is akin to saying that from this table, find out all the user IDs for whom the first row was a viewer. So this will ensure that only this row and this row are selected. So at this point, if we try to see the output of the second city first session viewer, what will it look like? It will look like this. So as you can see, we have only two users, user ID 1 and user ID 3. Now let's go back to the Notepad++ file again. So now that we have the first session viewer CTE ready, solving the problem is fairly straightforward. All we have to do is find out the count of sessions where the session type is a streamer and the user ID belongs to this set of user IDs. So that is done by this portion of the SQL query. What am I doing here? In the where clause, I am saying that the session type must be streamer. That ensures that we won't be accidentally counting any viewing session. And then we are also putting a condition on the user IDs. We are saying that the user ID must be one of those for whom the first session was a viewer. So this count function, which counts the session type of streaming sessions, is grouped by the user ID. And then we are ordering it by the descending order of counts of the session types. And finally, if there is a tie, we are ordering it by the ascending order of the user ID. So now that we understand the SQL problem, let's try to run it in the StrataScratch SQL editor window. When we run it, we see that the final output has two columns, user ID and number of sessions. We have user ID 1 with one session and user ID 3 with one session. And that agrees with the solution provided by StrataScratch. So I hope I was able to explain the solution to this SQL problem. I shall keep coming back with solutions to more SQL problems from StrataScratch. Please stay tuned.